What's going on, guys? It's Cimo. I am super excited to talk about one of the archetypes that is just making my inner childhood come to life, and that is the Valkyries. We got the fairy tales, we have the Valkyries. All we're missing now is Valen and the armor cards, and all of my childhood Yu-Gi-Oh! Dreams will have come true. But today we're talking about the Valkyries. On the Konami blog yesterday, they released an article discussing all of, or at least some of, the Valkyrie cards we're going to be expecting, and then YGO Organization also posted some of the other cards that they're probably going to talk about today, so I thought I would just go ahead and wrap it all up in one video. We're going to discuss if there's any competitive viability at all, but we're just going to go in depth one by one, discuss the cards, and see what we got. If you guys want to check out the links in the description to both of these articles, I'll have them there. And on your way down, if you want to join and become a YouTube channel member, there's no better time to do that than now. We've already got so many people becoming members, like Danger Darkrai 22, the T-Max Ruler, and Trigga J0825. Thank you guys so much for your support. So if you guys really want to help support the channel so I can keep bringing you amazing Yu-Gi-Oh! Content, be sure to hit that join button and become a channel member. But without further ado, let's go ahead and get right into it. We're going to start off with the main deck Valkyrie monsters, because I feel like that's a pretty good starting point before we get into some of these supporting spell cards. So the first Valkyrie card is Valkyrie Duelist, which is a fairy effect light level 4, 1000 attack, 1600 defense. If it's normal or special summoned, you can add one Valkyrie card from your deck to your hand, except itself. That's pretty good just right there on its own. It's obviously a once per turn effect, and it gains 200 attack for each of your opponent's banished monsters. I think Duelist is probably the best out of all of them, not because it's the searcher, but because it's level 4, and as you're going to see, that's going to be very problematic with this archetype just right off the bat. We'll go ahead and talk about that a little bit later. Next up is Valkyrie Zweite, which is a fairy effect level 5, 1600 attack, 1600 defense. If it's summoned, you can target one monster your opponent controls, destroy it. Now that's a really good effect, except the fact it has to be level 5. Now, what's cool is that I think you can circumvent this effect by, if you resurrect this card from the graveyard, special summon it from your hand, which we'll get into a little bit later. So there's ways to work around that, but I just really hate that this card is level 5. I wish you could just normal summon this card if it were level 4 and just destroy one of your opponent's monsters. That would be so much stronger, but unfortunately, I guess it had to be, you know, a little bit balanced. So after damage calculation, if this card battled, you can target one continuous spell in your graveyard, add it to your hand, and that's a once per turn effect as well. What I like about this is there are some continuous spells within this archetype, but it's not solely restricted to the archetype itself. Now, I don't know if there's going to be any other continuous spells that make sense to play in this deck, but at least you're not just restricted to picking one of the goddess cards, which we'll be talking about a little bit later. Rounding up the, I guess the smaller Valkyries, if you want to call them that, is Valkyrie Este, which is a fairy effect light level 6, 1600 attack, 1800 defense. If it's special summoned from your hand by a spell effect, which we'll get to later, you can target one Mischief of the Time Goddess in your graveyard, add it to your hand. Oh yeah, we're not going to leave this video without talking about Time Goddess, don't worry. If you control a Valkyrie monster other than itself, quick effect, you can banish one monster from your opponent's graveyard, then this card's attack becomes equal to the banished monster's original attack until the end of the turn, and that's once per turn. So there's two things I really like about this effect. First off, the attack modulating effect is actually kind of cool, because if your opponent has a really big monster in their graveyard, you can banish it with this effect, and now it's going to gain the attack value, and that's also going to become relevant with Mischief of the Time Goddess. But the second thing I like is that it's a quick effect, so if your opponent's trying to do any sort of graveyard shenanigans, you can actually chain this card in response to banish the monster, and even it doesn't matter with the attack value at that point, you're just trying to disrupt their play. So I mean, if they use like Monster Reborn, target one of their monsters in grave, you can chain this card to banish the monster, and now they lose the target. Now it does gain the attack value, so keep that in mind. So if they're targeting something like 0 attack, that could be pretty bad, but I like the flexibility that this card has, that it's like a built-in DD Crow, but you can also use it to just go in for a ton of damage. Next up is Valkyrie Brunhilde, which is a fairy effect, light level 7, 1800 attack, 2000 defense. Unaffected by your opponent's spell effects, that's pretty good. Gains 500 attack for each monster your opponent controls. When an opponent's monster declares an attack, you can have this card lose exactly 1000 defense, and if you do, your Valkyrie monsters cannot be destroyed by battle this turn. I don't know how relevant that last effect's going to be. I guess, you know, if they're not the highest attack value monsters, so I guess that could come up. But again, the biggest problem is, and I'm just going to keep reiterating this throughout the video, the fact that they're all very high level means it's very difficult to get a lot of them out onto the board through natural means. There's obviously going to be a card that makes that a lot easier, but I think that's going to be the biggest issue with this deck, is finding a consistent way to keep these monsters on the board, or just getting them on the board in the first place. Last but not least is Fortune Chariot. It's always considered a Valkyrie card. It's a fairy union effect monster. Wind, level 6, 1000 attack, 2000 defense. Once per turn, you can target one fairy monster you control, equip this card to that target, or unequip it and special summon it. The equipped monster would be destroyed by battle or card effect. Destroy this card instead. Pretty standard for like a union monster effect. The equipped monster can attack directly, but when it does so using this effect, the battle damage inflicted to your opponent is halved. Now, this is probably the worst card out of the bunch because it's just kind of awkward. The only reason you'd ever play this is because it's always considered a Valkyrie card, and if you need a ton of Valkyrie names, I think that's a good thing, but again, this is probably one that maybe you're going to want to pass on. I'm not too sure. Obviously, it was good in the anime, but just because it's good in the anime doesn't mean it's good in real life. Now, one of the issues I said with this archetype is getting these monsters onto the field because they're not level 4, aside from the first Valkyrie. But there is one card that helps with that, and it is Ride of the Valkyries. Now, Ride of the Valkyries says special summon any number of Valkyrie monsters with different names from your hand. If you special summon 3 or more monsters with this effect, you take no battle damage until the end of the next turn. That's pretty cool because that means you're not going to die even if your opponent manages to break your board. That's pretty cool. Now, during the end phase of the turn this effect is activated, shuffle all monsters you control into the deck. And lastly, you can banish this card from the graveyard, add 1 Mischief of the Time Goddess from your deck to your hand, and that is a once per turn effect. So, in an ideal world, you're gonna have Ride of the Valkyries with 3 or 4 other Valkyries in your hand, and then you can just spam them all onto the board, and then you're gonna be able to go in and ideally OTK your opponent. And that's gonna be due in part to Mischief of the Time Goddess, which is what we're going to talk about now. And oh boy, this is a card that a lot of us thought was going to be absurdly broken, but they had to keep it within the Valkyrie archetype, so I guess that's a bit of a saving grace if you want to look at it that way. I think it would have just been a complete and utter nightmare if it were just generic, but so I'm a little bit happy, but at the same time, you know, I think it would have been kind of cool to see some decks just play one of the most broken cards ever conceived. So, Mischief of the Time Goddess is a quick play spell. Neither player can activate cards or effects in response to this card's activation. Right off the bat, I hate any card that says that because this is an interactive card game, but at the same time, I kind of understand why this effect works this way, and you'll see why if you don't know what I'm talking about. Cannot be activated as Chain Link 2 or higher, again makes sense. At the end of your battle phase, if all monsters you control are Valkyries with a minimum of 1, send this card to the graveyard. Also, immediately after this effect resolves, skip to the start of the battle phase of your next turn. If you do, you cannot activate Mischief of the Time Goddess until the end of that turn. So basically what you're going to do is you're going to Ride to the Valkyries, summon all the Valkyries that are out in your hand. You're going to banish Ride to the Valkyries to add Time Goddess to your hand if you don't have it already. All the Valkyries are going to attack your opponent and do as much damage as possible. Then you're going to Time Goddess, skip your opponent's turn to the next battle phase and attack them with everything again because it's a new battle phase, and you're gonna kill them. That's essentially this deck's win condition. Now, is that realistically possible in the current competitive Yu-Gi-Oh environment? Probably not, because the biggest issue is getting basically a full grip of Valkyrie cards in your hand, along with Ride of the Valkyries, and you might be able to search this with the card that can search any Valkyrie card. I mean, if Evil Swarms can be searched by cards that say L Swarm, I don't see why that card can't search Ride of the Valkyrie, so I guess that's a slight consistency booster, but at the same time, you have to realize that if you don't have Ride of the Valkyries, your whole win condition pretty much just falls apart, and you're playing a deck that just has all these just awkwardly leveled monsters that you're not going to be able to summon, and that's going to be really bad. If we get Swan Maiden, which I believe just says special summon a a Valkyrie from your hand, I think that might be pretty good, but again, I don't know if that's going to be in here at the current moment. At least it would help with the consistency a little bit, but there are a few other cards I do want to talk about, and those are the goddesses. Now, the goddesses basically all work in tandem with one another. Each one of them has an effect to search out a different one. So Goddess Skuld has the ability to search Goddess Verdunde. Goddess Verdunde has the ability to search Goddess and then the Goddess doesn't have the ability to search any of them. So if you start off with Goddess Skuld, that's actually pretty good because it's effectively a +2 in terms of card advantage. Now, Goddess Skuld's effect reads, once per turn during your main phase, you can look at the top 3 cards of your opponent's deck and arrange them on top of their deck in any order. But you cannot normal or special summon monsters for the rest of this turn, except fairy monsters. Now, why do you want to rearrange these cards? Well, that leads on to Goddess Verdunde's Guidance. Now, this card reads, you can declare one type of card and reveal that top card of your opponent's deck, either monster, spell, or trap. If it was the declared type, set that card to their field, otherwise they add it to their hand, and you can only activate it once per turn. So this is pretty bad because, I mean, obviously, if you're doing this blindly and you call wrong, you gave your opponent a card for free. But typically, because Goddess Skuld searches Verdunde, that's not going to be an issue, but there are ways, you know, your opponent can possibly shuffle their deck, like in response or something, and kind of mess with that. So it's something to definitely be careful of. These goddesses have some pretty bad downsides if they don't go off correctly. And then lastly, we have Goddess Erd's Verdict, which says once per turn, you can declare one card name, then target one set card your opponent controls. Reveal the set card, and if it was declared correctly, banish it. Otherwise, banish one card you control. So again, pretty bad downside, but you should be able to correctly predict what your opponent has face down. I really wish Goddess Erd had the ability to search Goddess Skuld, because if that were the case, they would all be able to search each other, and I think that would be neat because you can only activate them once per turn anyway, so you basically are going to get a +2 if you see any one copy of the cards, and it makes it a lot more consistent. Maybe that'd be broken, but considering what we've seen for the Valkyrie archetype in a whole, I don't think it's that broken, but I definitely think Mischief of the Time Goddess is an absurdly crazy card that an archetype could ever have. So, in terms of competitive viability, I'm really not seeing it. Mischief of the Time Goddess is incredible, but the deck is still severely limited by the fact that it has a lot of consistency issues, but my inner childhood is satisfied that these cards are finally going to be printed, and so, you know, I'm pretty happy about that. But, guys, those are just my thoughts. Let me know down in the comments what you guys think about these new Valkyrie cards. I'd really love to hear your thoughts. Guys, thank you so much for watching the video. Be sure to like the video as always. Subscribe to the channel for more amazing Yu-Gi-Oh content. And if you found this video informative, consider becoming a YouTube channel member, because with your support and investing in my ability, I'm going to be able to keep bringing you amazing Yu-Gi-Oh content. So thanks so much again, and we'll see you next time.